Hello, everyone. Tonight we're relaxing with a shocking true story about life as a Roman prisoner. A place colder than your ex's heart, darker than your end-of-month wallet, and mustier than a pair of socks that's been stuffed in the corner of your closet since last winter. That place is a Roman prison. But don't think this is the polite kind of prison you see in the movies, where you're addressed as sir before your trial. No, here you don't have a name. You're just that guy. Or, if you're lucky, that guy. Now imagine you were walking down the street, eating a delicious piece of goat cheese, when suddenly you were grabbed by a Roman soldier, twice the size of a refrigerator. No explanation, no paperwork, and within an hour, you were standing in front of a pitch-black hole that led underground. A carcer, the official prison, or as the folklore called it, where dreams go to die. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the videos and subscribe, but only if you actually like what I do here. And I want to know, where are you watching from and what time? Type it in the comments. Now, turn off the lights. Let's relax together with tonight's journey. You get shoved, slip, and land on your ass on the icy stone floor. No one explains what you're being accused of. Maybe it's theft, maybe it's bad-mouthing the emperor, or maybe you're just too poor. In ancient Rome, being poor was almost a crime. The first air you breathe in from the basement is a mix of rust, dried shit, and something that reminds you of the time you forgot to wash your lunchbox for 3 weeks. Screams echo down the hallway, whether they come from the living or something long dead. You stand up, or at least try to. Your hand touches something slimy, hopefully water. A man in the corner sneezes like a gunshot, and you don't dare turn around for fear of seeing something you shouldn't. In the stone ceiling, a small crack lets in a faint light, but it is not a light of salvation. It is a light of humiliation. It is just enough to make you feel like there is no way out. Notable historical event? Yes, in 64 AD, after the Great Fire of Rome, Emperor Nero threw hundreds of innocent people, especially Christians, into prison for the perfect excuse. No trial, no defense, just an anonymous accusation and someone pointing a finger. Strange fact, Roman prisons were not meant for long-term confinement. They were not like modern prisons. They were more like waiting stations, waiting to be executed, to be sold into slavery, or to die of starvation. Often, being transported was more terrifying than being left there. You sit down, leaning against the cold wall. Every little noise is an explosion in your heart. Someone somewhere is whispering in a language you don't understand. Maybe Greek, maybe just talking to themselves. Then there's a rustling sound, a mouse, a snake, or something that shouldn't have a name. Historians still debate whether the Roman legal system was advanced or brutally brutal. Some praise it for having the earliest form of accusation and trial. Others argue that it was a stage where justice was merely a prop, and you, in this case, were a decoration about to be thrown away. A voice rang out, hoarse. First time. You turn. A man with a shaggy beard and eyes like glass marble smiles. Just wait until morning. Those bugs will wake you up. You laugh dryly, not because his joke is good, but because you realize he's telling the truth. You begin to understand that it's not the silence that's scary. It's the constant noise. Dripping water moans. Heavy breathing. You're in a place where every condition is designed not to punish, but to weigh you down hour by hour. A wave of sleep sets in. Not because you're tired, but because your brain starts to protect itself, slowing down like a night light whose batteries have run out. And then, in the darkness, you hear something you're not ready to know. A soldier just muttered a list, and your name was at the end. You wake up cold. Not the kind of cold that makes you shiver and pull the covers up, but the kind that seeps into your bones, sweeps through your lungs, creeps into your teeth, and makes every joint feel like it's about to crack. Your back goes numb, because you're lying on stone, not spa-like tile. Solid stone, rough, gritty, and dripping from the ceiling. When you try to turn, your back sounds like a cereal box being split in half. You find yourself pressed against a wet patch of something. In the dim morning light seeping through the crack above, you make out that it's greenish. Moss, maybe. Something alive. You hear snoring, hiccups, sniffles all around you, as if the whole room has a cold. A person is huddled to your left. The other has his feet propped up on you like you're a mattress. And somehow, a slipper that isn't yours is resting on his forehead. You jolted upright, nearly falling backwards as your head hit the low stone ceiling. This room was not made for tall people. In fact, it was not made for anyone alive. And then you look back at your bed, sunken stone floor, lined with hay from the time of Julius Caesar, surrounded by fossilized dirt. One notable historical fact: by the time of the Roman Republic, prisons had no such thing as a standard cell. There were no pillows, no beds. Some prisons didn't even have a place to lie down. You slept standing up, like a wet wooden post. The cold doesn't come only from the stone. The wind from the hallway carries the smell of rust, old sweat, and a faint burning smell, as if someone had burned something outside. You try to warm your hands by rubbing them together, then breathe in, but your breath evaporates as if afraid of the space. You turn to your right and are met with a pair of wide-eyed stares. A man about your age stares at you, his smile stiff. His eyes are bloodshot, his hair a tangle. You nod slightly. He doesn't respond. You smile politely. He still doesn't respond. You begin to understand a strange truth. He died last night, but no one bothered to clean him up. As you stand up again, you hear a faint rustling under your feet. Looking down, you see a bedbug, no, an army of bedbugs, having a feast on the edge of your neighbor's blanket. Then you realize your back is itching. Mouse. Maybe. Bedbugs. Sure. Self-esteem. Very little left. Historians still debate the prevalence of bedbugs and rats in Roman prisons. Some say this is modern exaggeration, while others cite a description from Tacitus. Nothing on a person is private, not even blood. Creepy poetry, right? You walk toward the wall, try to find a place to lean against. But the wall is occupied. A prisoner as big as a seal, his arms tattooed with Etruscan characters and smelling like stale shrimp, looks up at you, then lifts his leg and farts. You retreat in silence, your soul deeply wounded. You go back to where you were. There's no better choice. You sit down, your back against the corpse. Yes, you accept it. You say to yourself, just think of him as a pillow. Good luck with your second sleep. Time in prison doesn't pass like it does outside. There are no clocks, no calendars, no visible sun. You start marking time with sound. Thud sound, a person falls. Groaning, someone waking up from fever. The clapping. Could be joy, could be torture. No one knows. You remember the time you complained to your boss about the office air conditioning being too cold. A privileged moment. Now you crave that kind of cold, instead of the cold that feels like a live fish wrapped around your body. An older prisoner, dressed in a mere phantom piece of cloth, looks at you and says, you get used to the smell, but never get used to the sound. You smiled faintly. I think I'm used to it. He looked at you, expressionless, then whispered, not yours, someone else's, in your head. A mouse runs across your feet. You don't scream. You just look at it as if you've just shared a quiet sadness. It stopped, nodded. You think, maybe tomorrow you'll name it. Maybe. Marcus. And then a loud bang came from the hallway. The front door opened. The sound of steel boots hitting stone echoed. Someone was being dragged away. Not you. This time, you breathe a sigh of relief. But you know for sure, your turn will come. No one stays here forever. No one leaves intact. You don't remember exactly when you fell asleep. All you know is that when you opened your eyes again, the light from the crack in the ceiling had changed direction, and you saw a shadow standing right next to you. No, not standing. The shadow hovered, You hold your breath. Then the shadow spoke in a hoarse voice like the sound of sandpaper rubbing over dry skin. Your turn. You want to protest. You want to scream. But your throat has been asleep since last night, probably along with any belief you once had in justice. A hand pulled you to your feet. The rope that had been loosely tied around your wrist tightened, enough to hurt, but not enough to kill. You are dragged away like an old sack of rice. On your way out of the cell, you pass two guys playing some kind of game with bones. Human bones, it seems. One of them looks up and waves. Good luck. You nodded, not sure whether to thank or apologize. As you step out the door, the light hits you like a punch from the sun. You squint, trying to see around you. It's a long, dank hallway, moss growing from the ceiling and dripping down like a giant's hair soaked by rain. At the other end, there's chanting, or maybe screaming. It's hard to tell. You are pushed into a small room where a warden is waiting. He sat as if the chair had to obey him, one leg up on the wooden box, holding a red-hot iron bar in his hand. You glance at the bar, then at your hand. A simple and terrifying addition. You are about to be interrogated, not for any specific crime, just because you said nothing. In the Roman Empire, silence was a sin. Confession is reasonable. Rebuttal is disrespectful. But silence is conspiracy. And there is nothing more dangerous than the silence of an anonymous person. Historical fact: many Roman inquisitions took place without judges. A single verbal accusation from a person of rank, whether a fishmonger at a market or a sleepy soldier, was enough to make you sing like a canary. Here's a weird fact. Prisoners often had to pay to avoid being tortured. Yes, you heard that right. It was a safety fee. If you had a rich family, they would bribe the guards to give you gentle treatment. If not, good luck with that last tooth. You have no money, no acquaintances, just a name which no one asks for. You were flipped face down onto the wooden table, face down on a layer of smelly animal skin. Ever had a nice dinner? The warden asked, smiling as if he were about to set foot in a five-star restaurant. You want to say yes. You want to talk about the grilled fish your mother made when you were a kid, but instead, you make a sound like a jar being opened too quickly. The iron bar presses against your skin. You hear a hissing sound, burning skin smell. Your body convulses. Your head bangs against the table. Everything was white, then black, then red. You don't scream, not because you're brave, but because you're not sure you have enough breath. Another, apparently an apprentice, asked, if he doesn't say anything, may I test the leather strap? Do it gently, said the jailer, so that he will remember to answer when he comes to. Historians still debate whether Roman torture methods were standardized or improvised. Some say there were laws protecting Roman citizens from torture, but others counter. That was only true if you were actually a citizen, and someone could vouch for it. You didn't even have decent shoes. When you wake up, your mouth is as dry as a desert. Your heart is pounding like a drum. You don't remember exactly what you confessed. Maybe it was theft. Maybe it was conspiracy. Maybe you just repeated your name like a sad song. You are dragged back into the cell, tossed like a punching bag that has been punched too many times. A strange hand cradles your head. It is the old man from last night. He looked at you, his eyes no longer shining, but his mouth still muttered. Don't talk too much. They don't want the truth. They want a confession. You nod, as if you understand. But really, your head is spinning like a stuck water wheel. Your back burns. Your arms go numb. Your mind cracks. You don't cry, not because you're strong, but because you have no more tears. From the corner of the room, Marcus, the mouse, jumped onto your knee. It sat there, gnawing on something. Maybe a piece of cake someone dropped. You look at it, and for the first time all day, you smile. You whispered, as long as you don't tell on me, we'll be fine. You fall asleep, but the dream is not a gentle one. In it, you are being drowned. Not in the ocean, not in the river, but in a deep pit of murky water and laughter, the laughter of the person you once believed was you. When you wake up, you discover the reason is very real. Someone has just peed in the corner of the room, and the warm water is flowing toward you. You jump up, not out of anger, but out of survival instinct. Your back aches, your skin burns, and you shudder and look around. The urinator is a young, curly-haired man who looks like a fallen aristocrat. He's humming something in Greek as he finishes. You're about to say something, but then you remember. You don't need any more enemies. You move to another corner. Marcus is there, chewing on a leather strap. You sit down next to him like you would a close friend. For the first time in your life, you feel grateful for a mouse. Notable historical fact: Roman prisons, especially Tullianus in Rome, were sometimes built as deep wells, where the bottom part was completely dark. Prisoners were thrown into them almost to die. Some were even lowered through holes in the ceiling, like garbage. Strangely, you begin to get used to the darkness. Your vision adjusts. You begin to distinguish shadows, breathing, and even whispers like wind in your head. Maybe you're losing your mind. But here, losing your mind is a survival strategy. The old man beside you, now named Gaius, begins to tell the story. It is unclear to whom he is speaking, but you hear it as if he is telling it to you. Once upon a time, I was a silversmith, worked for the royal family. My hands once made a necklace for the emperor's mother. What do my hands do now? Pick lice, count the days, scratch backs. You asked softly, "What are you here for?" He shrugged. "A customer died in my house. They said I poisoned him." "Is that right?" He looked at you and smiled sadly. "My child, in Rome, right or wrong is a matter of who has more friends." You nod. That statement deserves to be written on a wall, if there were any walls that would allow it. Here's a curious fact. The Romans believed that criminals could be infected by word of mouth. If you heard someone talking about rebellion and didn't report it, you could be arrested along with them. This led to a strange phenomenon. People began whispering about everything, even in the market. Inside the cell, rumors spread like wildfire. One said a new prisoner was a former soldier. Another swore he was the one who killed a senator. "If that's true," you whispered to Marcus, "then he'll probably get better treatment than me." Here, a justified murderer is often treated better than an innocent unknown. A simmering debate ensued among the prisoners. Had anyone ever been released from here? Gaius said yes. One escaped by faking his own death. Another person retorted, "No, he really died, but because he yawned too much." You don't know who's right, but you keep the play dead idea in the back of your mind. Who knows? It might come in handy later. You've played the part of a tree in a school play. Maybe that skill is about to pay off. The next morning, you're called in for a health check. That's right. In this prison, they check to see if you're still alive enough to be interrogated again. The examiner was a gaunt old woman with only 2 teeth left, like quotation marks. She pressed hard on your bones, nodding her head as if she were examining a melon. It works," she said, signing her name on a wooden board as if you were inventory. You return to your cell with a slight sense of confusion, like someone tapped you on the shoulder for no reason. Gaius waits for you, holding a piece of moldy bread in his hand. "You're lucky today," he said, handing half of it to his friend. "You're about to refuse, but your stomach growls like a hungry elephant. You eat. It tasted sour, musty, and a little soapy, but you still found it better than anything you'd ever eaten while you were free. In the evening, a group of prisoners gathered to tell stories, as if this were a pub. Some told stories about their military life. Some told stories about old loves. You are asked to tell a story. You choose to tell about the raisin cookies your mother used to make, in a soft voice, with a faraway look in your eyes, as if the cookies were still on the table. No one laughs, but no one interrupts you. It was a win. Then Gaius said, "You will need sleep tonight. I heard from the guards that there will be a trial tomorrow." You swallow, not out of fear, but because you haven't been treated since you entered. Judgment, it could be judgment. It could be freedom. Or it could be a bottomless pit. You look up at the ceiling. For the first time you wish for stars, just one. But all you see is cold stone, and a drop of water falls on your nose like a kiss of fate. Marcus rested his head on your leg. You whisper, "If I don't come back tomorrow, remember to eat the remaining moldy cake. It won't go to waste." The sound of chains dragging across the stone floor woke you, or at least a part of you that was still awake. You didn't know if the sun had risen or set, only that your hands were tied, and two soldiers in leather armor stood like statues with eyes that said, "Try to resist, we're free." You glance at Gaius. He just nods, like this is the opening of the biggest show of your life. Marcus is nowhere to be seen, maybe hiding in someone's pocket, or writing his memoirs. You're taken down another hallway. Not the same one. This one is brighter, and the breeze is as cold as ice soaked in lemonade. On either side of the wall are stone slabs with names engraved on them. Not the names of the condemned, but the names of their guardians. Though strangely, many of the names have been scratched out or written over with less familiar ones. A key historical fact. During the Roman Empire, trials were not strictly based on law, as we understand it today. In many cases, testimony was a mere formality. The verdict was predetermined by social status, political allegiance, or hidden bribes. The Roman courts, though considered the prototypes for the modern legal system, sometimes functioned like a game show. Fast, strange, and unfair. You are ushered into a large room. It is not the grand courtroom you imagined. It is more like a warehouse in disguise. A wooden platform, stone benches, a few half-burnt candles, and a bust of an emperor tilted as if he were asleep. In the center of the room sat a man in a white toga trimmed with purple. A large ring rested on his little finger, shining like an empty promise. He didn't look at you. He looked at a list. Then he said, in a voice like someone who had just finished reading the lunch menu, "Name." You answer. "No family, no lineage." You shake your head. He sighed. "No father, no wealth, no title. A perfect test subject." You almost laugh. Not because it's funny, but because it sounds like a shampoo commercial. A soldier standing behind read out the charges. Causing a public disturbance. Failure to report when asked. Disrespectful behavior towards royal symbols. You frown. Since when? You opened your mouth to object, but the officer raised his head to look at you for the first time, and asked a question that made your heart colder than the water in an ice well. Do you believe in God? Here's a curious fact. The Romans often used faith as a test of loyalty. If you refused to offer incense to a statue of the emperor, you could be considered a traitor, especially if you were a commoner. No one to protect you, no one to mourn you. You nod slowly. "I believe in many things." The man chuckled. A clever answer, but not clever enough to get away with it. He wrote something down, then nodded. A soldier stepped forward, speaking as if announcing a lottery prize. "This person will be transferred to a construction site in Ostia. Work under supervision. No parole. No correspondence. No right of appeal." You stand still. The square at Ostia. You've heard of it. It's like time commits suicide. People go in, no one comes out. Not because they die, but because they dissolve like salt in water. Historians still debate Ostia. It was once a thriving port, but also a testing ground for re-education prisoners who were not subject to execution. Some accounts describe the site as the largest dam camp in the empire, while others say it was a secret quarry for stone used in aristocratic mansions. Either way, they all agree. You don't want to go there. You are dragged. Not tortured, not tied down. But the freedom in the hallway is tantalizing. You are free to die. On the way out, you see another prison van waiting. 4 wooden wheels, an iron grill, and a driver whose smile looks like he's been asleep for 10 years. Gaius stood there, bound with old rope. You don't know whether to be happy or worried. He glanced at you, smiling sadly. I guess I'll teach you how to avoid breaking your back when carrying rocks. You nodded slightly, then got into the car like someone who knew he was about to enter the vague land between life and death. Marcus, you don't see him. Maybe he left. Maybe he's sitting in someone's pocket, watching you from afar. Or maybe he found an outlet that you never had. The car started moving. The wheels creaked like an old man's breathing. You leave the nameless prison and enter a new world, where people are not executed, but slowly forgotten. You sat still, your head resting on a cold wooden bar, thinking to yourself, if anyone is listening, remember me. I existed. The drive to Ostia is not long, but each jolt of the wooden wheels feels like your soul is being ripped out of your spine. The wind blows from the sea, carrying the scent of salt, seaweed, and, strangely, burnt horse manure. Gaia sits beside you, eyes half closed, as if conversing with gods whose names you have yet to learn. Along the way, you see glimpses of the world you once lived in. Women carrying water, children chasing pigeons, lovers sitting behind bushes, pretending not to hear the passing prison wagon. And they all turn away, not out of disgust, but because they fear being implicated. Historical fact: Ostia Antica was once the empire's busiest port, receiving wheat from Egypt, oil from Hispania, and wine from Gaul. But beneath its glittering facade were hundreds of construction sites, where thousands of prisoners were forced to work in hellish conditions. In contemporary texts, Ostia was sometimes referred to as the cemetery of the living. You arrive as the sun is high in the sky, but the light only serves to clarify the truth. This is no city. This is a carnivorous machine. Mountains of rubble are piled high. Wooden cranes squeal, and shouts in every language are heard. Latin is only a small part of it. The rest is Greek, Punic, Lusitanian, and curses that need no translation. Marcus did not follow his friend. Gaius said that perhaps the rat had a special smell that made it chosen to go into the crematorium to clean up the dead. You ask no more. The supervisor who greets you is a woman. That surprises you. Her hair is tied back. Her tunica is stiff as if starched in blood, and her eyes could cut wood. She looks you up and down as if she were assessing a roast. You're small, but straight-backed. Good. She tosses you a pickaxe. Not a digging tool, but a crude piece of metal. You will strike the rock. If you miss 3 times, I will replace your hand with a rock. Here's a curious fact. In some Roman forts, instead of executing prisoners who broke the rules, overseers would stamp warnings by forcing them to carry heavy loads all day. In some cases, prisoners' hands were tied to rocks to teach them a lesson about the weight of responsibility. Yes, the Romans loved metaphors too. You are taken to a digging area. There is no shade, just rocks and screams. Gaius is taken to the mortar mixing area. He turns, raises his hand as if in farewell, and shouts. If you survive until evening, you will find maggot-infested wheat stew as your reward. You start working. Each blow is a cacophony of pain. Wrist shake, shoulders scream, and your head slowly becomes as empty as an upside-down bowl. No one talks. No one laughs. No one has the energy to think. Historians still debate whether this system of forced labor was effective. Some believe that productivity was so low that prisoners had to be replaced constantly. Others believe that it was more a tool of deterrence than production, a message that those who resisted would not disappear, but would be exposed day by day, hour by hour, until they melted before everyone's eyes. You stop once, just to catch your breath, and immediately, a stone flies by, grazing your cheek. The one who threw it is the female supervisor. She says nothing, just holds up 2 fingers, the signal for a second warning. The 3rd time, you know, there will be no stone. There will be a whip. In the middle of the session, another prisoner collapses. No one stops. The guard orders him pulled out like a wet bag of sand. You glance up, and in that opaque gaze, you see yourself. or at least the prospect of what you might become. At night, you were given your rations, thin gruel with sand, a few beans, and water, if you could call it water. It was the color of rusted steel and the smell of memories no one wanted to remember. You find Gaius, and strangely enough, he is still alive. "I don't think you'll last the first day," he said, eating and smiling toothlessly. You replied, "I think so too." "That is the secret of longevity," he reflected. "Every day, believe that you are going to die. Everything after that is a miracle." You smile. For the first time in days, you actually smile, even if it's just on the inside. Marcus, you are still nowhere to be seen, but a piece of bread, the corner of which has been nibbled off, lies on your lap like a silent greeting. Maybe it is near. Maybe it still believes there is hope for you. You lie down on the stone floor, your back drenched in sweat and dust. Above you is a dim moon behind the iron grating. You count silently. Another day has passed. No freedom, no hope, but you're alive. It was the first victory in the field of oblivion. The next morning begins with the roar of a prisoner being dragged from his straw blanket for sleeping a breath too long. You wake with a start, your limbs numb as if frozen, and realize you have survived a second night, or at least your body has. Gaius was no longer beside you. The indentation where he had lain was still warm. In the Ostia Square, the first awake was often the one who lived the longest. You drag yourself up and head toward the work area. A stone tablet dangles from a rope, with a list of names carved in shallow marks, simply because no one expected the names to last long enough to be carved deeply. Your name today stands next to the words Restful shaft. Before you could understand what a tractor was, you were forced into a team of 4, each carrying a wooden frame like a bladeless plow. Their mission? To drag rocks from the harbor to the construction site. The rocks were as big as coffins, as heavy as the emperor's promise when the people were starving. An official historical fact. Ostia was built on a scale far beyond that of a port city. It was a symbol of Rome's expansive ambitions, and the regime's willingness to use humans as cogs. The massive blocks were hauled by human power rather than animal power, since prisoners were cheap and did not require good meat. You strap yourself in, and when the spotter yells pull, all 4 of you grit your teeth and push forward. Every step is a vote between life and pain. No one wins. Only you lose. Gaius appears in the middle of the session, a bag of mortar in his hand. He doesn't look at you, but quietly slips a fig into your pocket as he passes. He doesn't say anything, doesn't smile, but you know it's his way of saying, "You're not dead good." A curious fact. Some sources suggest that prisoners often developed highly sophisticated underground barter systems in Roman labor camps. Dried figs, goat bones, or a piece of waxed thread could serve as currency. Each item worth a fraction of a dream of surviving another day. You keep pulling. Your head is steaming. Your feet are bleeding but calloused. One of your friends falls around a corner, rocks at his leg. No one stops. The spotter waves, which means keep pulling, no matter what. Historians still debate whether this level of brutality was widespread throughout the empire, or limited to special camps like Ostia. Some believe it was a systematic policy of repression reserved for those who did not deserve to exist. Others argue that it was the result of power being concentrated in the hands of unchecked overseers, each becoming a minor god, acting on instinct rather than law. In the middle of the session, you are called to the front of the line. The female supervisor, her name is Claudia, points at you and says, "You have a good back. Move to the mortar mixer tomorrow. Cleaner work. But there's a price." You don't know if it's a threat or a reward. You just nod, your eyes never leaving the ground. In the afternoon, you get a new meal. Again porridge, but this time it's flavored with mint. Maybe it's a leaf that fell into the pot. Or maybe it's a prank by the chef, who used to be a psycho soldier. Either way, It's the only thing that makes your afternoon worth calling alive. You sit by the wall, where several other prisoners sit like unfinished stone statues. Gaius arrives, holding a small piece of wood carved with the shape of something that looks like a mouse. "I think Marcus is still around," he said, handing you the piece of wood like a will. You turn the piece of wood, silently. Gaius continued, "You know, I had a dream once that I escaped from here. I didn't run. I just opened my eyes, and I was somewhere else. No more chains. No more Ostia. No more pain. You don't ask how the dream ends. There are things best left in sleep. That night, you lie on the dirt floor, your head propped up on a log, your arms clutching the wooden carving of a mouse. In the distance, you hear the sound of waves. Ostia has a sea, but you don't see it. You just hear it, and imagine that, if the wind changes direction, you might be blown away like a little piece of sand. No longer stuck here. You mumble softly, 'Tomorrow is another day, but I am still me.' No one listens, but the wind does. You wake up to the sound of wood on stone, not a drum, but a guard hitting the railing with his stick to call the prisoners. Each sound is a reminder. Today is not the day you die. You were called aside, along with 3 others. Gaius looked at you as you stood, his eyes flashing for a moment, as if he had just seen a curse lifted. You knew he was worried, not because of the terrifying mortar mixer, but because anything else in Ostia could be a form of execution, scented with chance. Mixing mortar, you think. A lighter job, they say. But you never believe what they say in a place where people are no longer human. The mortar racks were on the north side, where the sun beat down on your head, and the ground was so hot you felt like you were standing on a frying pan of oil. There, quicklime, sand, and water were poured into large wooden vats. Prisoners would stir the mixture with their hands, or their feet, or anything else that could move. An official historical fact, quicklime was widely used in Roman construction, but contact with skin, when not properly dissolved, could cause severe chemical burns. That's why many Romans called the process the kiss of Vulcan, the god of fire and blacksmithing. You are given a short stick, not long enough to keep you at arm's length from the mortar. Beside you is an older man, his skin streaked with white scars, like a map of days gone wrong. "First time?" he asked, his voice like pebbles in water. You nod. Breathe through your nose. Don't get the lime in your eyes. If your skin feels numb, stop. Otherwise, you'll soon have nothing to worry about. You stir. Your arm aches, then goes numb, then stiffens like rotten wood. Water splashes onto your face. You hear your skin sizzling like roasting meat, but you don't stop. You remember Claudia's kick. You remember Gaius's eyes. You remember Marcus, even though he's a rat. Maybe he's still around somewhere, waiting for you to survive so he can share another crumb. A curious fact. There's archaeological evidence that some prisoners at Ostia, because they lived so long, learned to adjust the mortar ratio to make it less corrosive, allowing them to survive longer but also be more efficient at their work. A cruel paradox. The better you endure, the harder it is to be freed. Halfway through the session, a supervisor came to check the quality of the mortar. He swiped a finger and tasted it, as if evaluating a soup in a fancy restaurant. Not enough sand. Who mixed this barrel? You don't say anything, but the person next to you gets it. The overseer sneered, then raised his hand. The man was dragged away, not for punishment, but for relocation. In Ostia, that phrase meant to disappear. Historians still debate. Were these disappearances part of a policy of blacking out prisoners, or were they simply the result of administrative chaos? No one agrees, but all agree on one thing. To be called by name and never mentioned again was a fate worse than death. In the afternoon, you are given a small towel, the first thing you have after 3 days of surviving the mortar. You wipe your face with it, touch your cheeks, and realize that your skin has peeled off in some places. But you don't groan, don't cry. You just think, tomorrow I can still stir, which means I'm still there. Gaius reappeared after dinner, this time bringing a rumor. There's a new arrival. A noble. Exiled for treason. They say he has gold hidden somewhere in the camp. You shake your head. Don't look at me like I believe it, said Gaius. I only tell you, because some of the prisoners are starting to ask around. Where there's hope is where there's a dagger. You knew he was right. Trust was the most valuable commodity in this place, and the most dangerous. A rumor could cost a man his life. A false view could cost you your arm. That night, you sit alone, your back against the empty mortar barrel, your eyes looking up at the sky. The only thing that isn't fenced in, chained, or taxed. You think about the name you forgot. Who were you before you were captured? Did you have a mother, a lover, a dream? Even something as small as owning a sharp knife? Or was that memory something you made up to keep from turning to stone? You don't remember, but you're alive. And in Ostia, that's a proud statement, even if no one applauds you. You whisper into the night, tomorrow I will stir again, but don't let me forget why I am stirring. A gentle breeze blew by, carrying the scent of lime, salt, and a very vague warm scent, like the scent of a loved one you held as a child. Just for a moment, you smile, even though no one sees. You wake up in the pale morning light, your back aching and your wrist stiff as wet logs left in the kitchen corner. A new day, which means another chance at not dying, even if it's as slim as the dust on a chariot's wheels. Today, however, something was different. The guard who came to call you did not carry a stick. He simply nodded and turned away, motioning for you to follow. There was no shouting, no pulling of hair, no kicking of shoulders. You could even hear your own feet hitting the ground, a rarity in Ostia. You are led to a small shack behind a brickyard. The door is ajar, and inside, someone is waiting. You walk in, hesitant like a thief, not knowing what he is about to steal. The man sitting there raised his head. His clothes were clean, relatively so. His eyes were sharp as needles. His hair was cut short in an aristocratic manner, but his hands were sunburned. New, you realize, this is the rebellious aristocrat that Gaius spoke of. Sit down, he said, his voice softer than you expected. I need a helper, and they say you mix mortar quite well. You don't know if it's a compliment or a sarcasm, but you sit. An official historical fact. Not all prisoners at Ostia worked in the same terrible conditions. Some who were educated or had previous status might have been assigned lighter jobs like writing, guarding the storehouses, or even serving as servants to exiles like this nobleman. They called it service cum privilegio, privileged slavery. He introduced himself as Decimus. I was proconsul of Hispania Superior, he said, until I uttered a false remark at a banquet attended by the prince. You know it. In Rome, a wrong word was more dangerous than a drunken overseer. Your work begins immediately. Record the mortar quantities, list the tools you still have available, and mix the water to the correct ratio in the buckets for tomorrow's mix. No more hauling rocks, no more stirring by hand, at least not yet. And Decimus, you quickly realize, is no aristocrat by any means. He talks like someone who has walked through mud, but still remembers how to spell his own name. A curious fact, some exiled Roman nobles still ate their lunch with silver spoons, even when they had to eat porridge from a wooden barrel. One official exile to Egypt reportedly carried a box of mirrors with him so he could shave every morning, even though there was no one else to look at him. Decimus did not carry a mirror, but he did carry an inkwell and a wax tablet, more valuable than gold here. He handed the tablet to his friend. Write your name. You pick up the pen, hesitate, then you write, not the prisoner's name, not the number. You write the name you once had, the name you thought you had forgotten. He nodded. Good. A man without a name is easily forgotten, and to forget here is to die a second death. In the evening, instead of lying on the ground, you sit with him at the stone table, sharing a piece of cheese that has dried out and is as hard as crushed stone. You ask him, Why choose me? He looked at you for a long moment, and then shrugged. Because people fear your silence. No one survives that long keeping silent without a reason. Historians still debate. Were these close prison bonds formed out of genuine trust, or were they simply survival strategies? Accounts are conflicting. Some describe these bonds as friendships, while others call them alliances against despair. You don't know what you are to Decimus, but you know, in this world of plaster and pain, it's a miracle that someone calls you by your name. When you returned to camp that night, Gaius was waiting. He didn't ask any questions, just saw the piece of bread in your hand and smiled. This is the first time I've seen you eat without shaking. You give him half a cake. He shakes his head. I am old. You need it more. Then he added, is he real, or is it just a test? You don't know. You lie down, still holding the wooden pen Decimus gave you loosely, and in your head you repeat one thing over and over again, your name. Your real name. Not your number. Not mortar stirrer. Not stone hauler. Your name. A small word, but you have never seen it so beautiful. You fall asleep, for the first time dreaming of no chains or buckets of mortar. You dream that you are reading a book with no words, but each page is a memory, a laugh, a touch. You turn the page. You still have a name, and that's where all hope begins. You wake up with a sharp pain in your wrists, where the shackles are still pressed against your skin. But today, the difference is that you're not trudging to the mortar mixer. You're being led to a new area, where Decimus tells you you'll learn a valuable skill. You don't know what it is, but at least it's not the feeling of lime fire eating away at your skin. It was a small wooden room, with a rickety wooden table, a few quills, a wax tablet, and an inkwell of charcoal and herbs. Decimus sat there, his eyes glowing like a candle in the dark night of Ostia. He said, you will learn to write. You smirk, not in disdain but in wonder. Writing? Here, in hell. But it feels weird. You can learn something without being asked to stir mortar or break rocks. You began to practice writing each letter on the slate, your hands shaking like a child learning to mark for the first time. Decimus was patient, correcting every curve, every straight line, every dot, every comma. An official historical fact, because not everyone could read and write in ancient Rome. Literate prisoners were often assigned to document management or supervisory tasks, which not only helped them survive, but also increased their status in the camp. Decimus tells of letters he had sent to his family, of pleas, of stories from home. You listen and feel the tears almost overflowing. In Ostia, tears were a luxury more precious than stale bread. A curious fact, the Romans had a type of pen made of grass and bird feathers called calamus, but you and Decimus only have crude bamboo quills, which remind you of your broken ballpoint pen later, when you were in school. Historians still debate whether learning to read in prison was a way to change the fate of prisoners or just a means to keep them busy and reduce rebellion. Many documents show that some prisoners later became secretaries, managers, and even chief supervisors in the camps. But there are also cases of prisoners being severely punished for using writing to plan escapes. You don't care about those arguments. You just know that every time the pen touches the waxed board, your skin feels less numb, your soul feels less cramped. Once Decimus asked his friend, what would you write if you could? You think, write my name. You say, and write that one day we will leave here. He chuckled, a big dream for a caged man. That day, you do not have to do any other heavy labor. Instead, you are assigned to record the quantity of materials, the condition of tools, and requests from the supervisor. You learn to distinguish each ink, each font, each hidden mark in the old notes. You begin to feel like you are not just an inanimate name, but a piece in the ruthless machine of Ostia. At night, when you lie down in your small wooden room, you dream of a large round table, surrounded by people holding pens, writing on cowhide, signing important documents. You dream of yourself sitting there, writing your name on the honor roll, not the name of a prisoner, but the name of a free man. You smile when you wake up, knowing it was probably just a dream. Life goes on, and you, with each stroke, are rewriting your life. Do you remember the musty smell of rotting wood and mud that filled the air when you first entered Decimus's classroom? A smell like disappointment packed into every splintered piece of wood, mixed with the smell of prisoner sweat and a bit of dried rosemary that had fallen from a bunch of grass in the corner. It made you want to give up, but also awakened part of you that was there when you were a child curious about the world outside. Today, you're given a more complex task, copying a letter by hand on a wax tablet. Decimus tells you that, throughout Roman history, literate secretaries and prisoners like you were the key cogs that kept the empire's bureaucracy running. In fact, there were prisoners who had been royal secretaries or famous writers, punished for a misspoken sentence or a misdirected letter. And now, you were writing on a wax tablet, continuing that tradition under the most dire of circumstances. An official historical fact. In Roman prisons, some literate prisoners could become scribes, who helped keep important notes, especially when writing on parchment was rare and expensive. A strange fact. Historians have discovered some ancient Roman documents that contain traces of very strange writing. Codes or symbols that only special secretaries or prisoners could understand, used to transmit secret messages in prison or to avoid the control of prison guards. Curious, you asked Decimus, what can we write to change our lives? He sneered. They say writing is power, but in prison, it can also be a weapon or chains. You look at the calluses on your hands, think of the days spent trudging across the cold stone floor, and realize writing is the only weapon you have left to yourself. An open scholarly debate remains. Was teaching Roman prisoners to write truly a humanitarian act? Or was it simply a form of management designed to turn them into more efficient camp workers? Some scholars argue that it helped prisoners regain their individuality, while others argue that it was a way to soften them and break their spirit of rebellion. You don't care about that argument. You just want to know that every time you pick up a pen, you are writing your life story, not just as a prisoner, but as a human being with dreams and hopes. That night, as darkness fell over the prison, you sat beside Decimus, the two of you lighting a small candle, the flickering light dancing across the still dry letters. You began to tell him about your old dreams, things you thought were lost forever. Remember that time when sunscreen smelled like crocodile poop? Yes, you do. Decimus chuckled, saying that in prison, smells are also something that makes you homesick or want to throw up. You find yourself laughing, a soft laugh, not out of joy, but out of the realization that no matter where you are, people are always looking for something to hold on to. You wrote, "Hope is the only thing that is not chained." Do you remember the first time you saw the prison wall? A tall, gray stone wall like a solid curtain of night separating you from the free world outside. Light shone through mossy cracks. Wind blew through the gaps, creating a howling sound like the whisper of hidden souls. It's also where you learn a truth about power and control that probably no school teaches. That day, you were given a new assignment. Guard not to keep you, but to keep what they call prison secrets. In Ostia, Decimus tells you, there's more than just chains and labor. People are imprisoned by invisible things, rumors, psychological control. You stand there, looking out, where other prisoners are working, your eyes glued to the old steel door, where there's a small box called the secret door. It is said to contain records of prisoners, accusations, and even secret sentences that only the guards know. An official historical fact. Roman prisoner records were meticulously kept in prison archives, containing detailed information about crimes, punishments, and even complex social relationships within the camp. The records helped the prison guards manage efficiently, but they were also tools for ideological control. A strange fact. There are some prisoners who are considered privileged and are allowed to access these files. They can manipulate the information to change the fate of themselves or their comrades. But because of that, many scandals and conspiracies have been buried in the darkness of those small cells. You are tasked with recording and checking these records, a job that requires the utmost care and attention. Once you discover a discrepancy in a record, and you wonder if it was an error or a sinister plot, historians still debate whether the storage and control of information helped the Ostia prison camp operate efficiently, or simply created a more sophisticated surveillance network that kept prisoners from ever truly being free, even in their minds. You understand that, in such a system, information is as dangerous as any weapon. You begin to realize knowledge, or rather the ability to control information, is the only way to survive and even to dream of freedom. At night, as you lie in the dark corner of your wooden cell, you think about the stories you've heard from other prisoners, the rumors, the secrets that have yet to be revealed. You think of yourself, of Decimus, and of the small wooden table where the two of you share candlelight and a few pieces of rock-hard bread. You smile softly and write a sentence. The strongest wall is the wall of the mind. Remember how your fingers trembled the first time you picked up a stone and smashed it into mortar? It was the feeling that made it so real. You thought you wouldn't survive the day. But then you realized it wasn't just the physical labor that was hell. An official historical fact. Prisoners of labor, or damnati ad metalla, were the main labor force in Roman mines and construction, where working conditions were extremely harsh with high mortality rates. Today, you are assigned a different task, to supervise a new group of prisoners who have just been brought into the camp. You realize that, although you were once one of them, the difference is that you now have some power, even if it's just a small one. It's hell. A strange fact. While most prisoners know only misery, a few become prisoners, receiving small privileges such as better food, more comfortable sleeping quarters, or being assigned special tasks such as managing records or supervising labor. You look at the worried faces of the newcomers, remembering your own face, a face of panic, bewilderment, and fear. An open academic debate remains. Is the empowerment of some prisoners within this system a subtle form of control intended to divide and rule? Or is it actually an opportunity for prisoners to escape hell if they know how to take advantage of it? You don't know the answer, but you know you have to take advantage of this opportunity. You begin to learn how to manage, organize, and coordinate every move of your subordinates. At night, when everything is quiet, you sit alone, looking up at the night sky through the hole in the stone wall. The stars are cold but still bright, a reminder that freedom is not always close, but always exists somewhere. You think of the hard days of labor, the light beatings, the sneaky exchanges of bread with fellow prisoners. You smile softly when you remember the time Decimus told the story of the Roman soldier's helmet, which looked like a frying pan, making you laugh even in the darkness of your prison. You write a new sentence on the chalkboard. A little power can change the game. You remember the first time you were allowed to leave the labor block and go into the common area of the camp, where prisoners were allowed to gather to chat, exchange news, or simply get some air. The air there smelled of sweat, smoke, and an undercurrent of despair, a smell you'll never forget, like the smell of burnt coffee or the oil of old cars in the city today. You realize immediately that in Ostia, not only is your body imprisoned, but your soul is also locked in an invisible cage. An official historical fact. Roman prison camps often had an area called a spatium, where prisoners were allowed to gather for short periods of time, allowing guards to control and relieve tension and maintain order. A curious fact. Even in captivity, prisoners maintain complex social networks with unspoken rules, alliances, and even secret clubs. Some have created sophisticated signaling systems to transmit messages undetected by guards. You realize that even within cold stone walls, people still find ways to connect and hold on to a small bit of freedom. You remember heated debates between prisoners about politics, religion, and even art, something you never imagined you would hear in a prison camp. Historians still debate whether these gatherings actually helped keep prisoners' morale up or were simply opportunities for powerful groups within the prison to expand their influence. You stand in the crowd, listen, observe, and think to yourself, in this world, knowing how to survive is not only based on physical strength, but also the art of communication and psychological tactics. You smile as you remember the time Decimus told you about a jailer who was fooled with a funny story about a horse that seemed to speak Roman, a story that, while funny, helped people forget the harsh reality for a moment. You write on the chalkboard, "Freedom of the soul is something no one can take away." Do you remember the feeling when night fell and the prison camp was plunged into darkness, save for the steady breathing of the prisoners? That was when you felt most alone, but also when you understood that it was in that silence that your soul was truly tested. You lie there, listening to the wind blowing through the cracks in the stone walls, feeling the cold seep into your tired skin. An official historical fact: Roman prisons were often built with solid structures to prevent any attempt at escape, but also created a special space for prisoners to face themselves. Curious fact: it has been found that many prisoners in Roman prisons developed forms of meditation and prayer as a way to stay sane and find peace of mind. Some even created songs or poetry to ease their pain and stress. You remember the times when you listened to the breathing of Decimus, who became your only friend in the darkness, who told you stories from the distant past and reminded you that, no matter where you are, true freedom is a state of mind. Historians still debate whether spiritual practices, such as meditation or prayer, were actually common in Roman prisons or were just a figment of the imagination based on rare records. You smile when you think of yourself, a literate prisoner, sitting in the dark and writing your last words on a wax board, hoping that your story would be told, not as a sentence, but as a symphony of survival. You write on the board, "In the darkness, the light of the soul never goes out." Now you sigh, close your eyes, and feel peace seep into every cell of your body. You are no longer a prisoner confined by cold stone walls. You are the one who holds your freedom in a world without freedom.